The summer heat slammed into eastern Wyoming like a death sentence that year. The ground cracked open in jagged lines, the grass scorched to a brittle yellow, and the hot wind howled through the fields like the breath of some starving beast. Reed Walker gripped the steering wheel of his battered old pickup, sweat trickling down his neck as he scanned the horizon for any sign of relief. The engine was running hot again, the needle on the temperature gauge creeping into the red. He'd been driving back from Casper to Laramie after a long day fixing irrigation pumps at a neighboring ranch, the kind of grunt work that paid just enough to keep the lights on and food in the fridge for him and Josie. Beside him in the passenger seat, his 7-year-old daughter fiddled with her worn-out comic book, her small fingers tracing the colorful panels. Josie was the spitting image of her mother, curly brown hair, bright blue eyes that lit up with curiosity at the smallest things. But Reed tried not to think about that too much. Thinking about Hannah always led to the same dark place, the hospital room 3 years ago, the sudden brain hemorrhage after Josie's birth. The doctor's apologies that meant nothing. Since then, life had narrowed to survival. Drive work, pay bills, keep Josie safe. No room for extras, no time for regrets. "Daddy, are we almost home?" Josie asked, her voice pulling him back. "Not yet, kiddo, but soon," Reed replied, forcing a smile. He glanced at the dashboard, overheating bad. Up ahead, a faded sign caught his eye. Dawson Creek Ranch. The place looked rough, even from the road fences, leaning like drunkards a barn with a sagging roof, fields of alfalfa withered under the relentless sun. But there might be water. He pulled off the highway, the truck rattling over the gravel driveway. As he eased to a stop near the weathered wooden house, something on the front door fluttered in the wind, a notice pinned with rusty nails. Reed stepped out the dry heat, hitting him like a wall, and walked closer. It was a foreclosure warning from the bank. 14 days. That's all the owner had to pay up or lose everything. Reed felt a pang in his chest. He'd seen notices like that before, back when he and Hannah were scraping by on their tiny plot before she got sick. But this wasn't his fight. He just needed water for the radiator. Josie hopped out after him, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Daddy, is this our stop? Do they have horses?" Before Reed could answer, a woman emerged from the barn, wiping her hands on her jeans. She was about 28, with sun-kissed cheeks, brown hair tied back in a hasty ponytail, and boots caked in dried mud. In one hand she held a hammer, but it trembled slightly, not from fear. Reed thought, but from exhaustion. Her eyes met his sharp and wary, the look of someone pushed to the edge. "If you're here to buy the land, turn around," she said flatly. "I'm not selling to anyone." Reed raised his hands in surrender. "Not here for that. My truck's overheating. Just need some water if you've got a hose." She eyed the pickup, then Josie peeking from behind him. Something softened in her expression when she saw the girl. "You've got a kid." "Yeah," Reed said simply. She hesitated, then nodded toward the side of the house. "Hosey is over there. Help yourself." "Thanks." Reed grabbed a bucket from the truck bed and headed to the spigot, filling it with cool water, while Josie wandered a few steps, staring at the empty fields. As he poured into the radiator, his gaze drifted back to the notice on the door. 14 days. Hell of a timeline to save a place like this. The woman Lena, as she'd introduce herself later, watched him from a distance. Reed could feel her eyes on him, assessing. He wasn't the type to pry into strangers' business. Life had taught him to keep moving, fix what he could, and leave the rest. But there was something about this ranch, about her standing alone in the middle of all this decay, that tugged at him. It reminded him too much of those first months after Hannah, when the world felt like it was crumbling and he had no one to help hold it up. Once the truck was cooled, he straightened up. "Appreciate it. We'll be out of your hair." But as he turned to leave, a gust of wind ripped the notice loose, sending it skittering across the dirt. Reed caught it mid-air, reading the details. Overdue loans, drought-induced crop failure, impending seizure by the bank unless paid in full. He handed it back to her. 14 days, he asked quietly. She snatched it, pinning it back with a sharp jab. 13 and a half now. Reed nodded, glancing around again. The barn looked ready to collapse, the fences gapped like missing teeth. Josie piped up from the truck. Daddy, do they have horses here? Lena's gaze shifted to the girl, and for a moment her hardness cracked. Two left, but they're as skinny as the rest of us. Josie grinned unfazed. Reed felt that familiar pull, the one that said, "Walk away, mind your own road." But Lena's eyes held the same hollow desperation he'd seen in his own mirror too many times. She was fighting alone, just like he had been. "I'm Reed Walker," he said. "This is Josie. Lena Dawson. This was your family's place and my husband's." She replied, her voice tight eyes on the barren fields. "Grant died last April. Fell from his horse checking the north fence. Everything's been sliding since." Reed didn't offer condolences. He'd heard enough empty sorries to know they didn't help. Instead, he asked, "Bank or private lender?" "Bank sold the debt to Harvey Cole." Her tone turned icy. "He's been waiting for the drought to finish me off." Reed knew the type vultures circling for cheap land grabs. He should get in the truck and go. But Josie was watching, and something in Lena's weary stance mirrored his own battles. "I could stick around a few days," he heard himself say. "I know engines, fences, wells. Can't promise miracles, but I can patch things up." Lena stared, suspicion flickering. "I can't pay you." "Not asking for pay up front, just a spot to sleep in the old barn and meals for the kid." "Why?" she demanded, hammer still in hand. Reed met her gaze. "Because I know what it's like watching everything you built slip away." The wind howled again, hot and unforgiving. Lena weighed his words, then nodded slowly. "Fine. But if you're here for pity and bail halfway, don't start." "I don't quit halfway," Reed said. As if to test him, a loud crack echoed from the west barn. A section of the roof caved in, sending dust and splintered wood crashing down. Reed stared at the mess, then back at Lena. 13.5 days now. The disaster had started before he'd even unpacked his tools. The next morning, Reed was up, before the sun cracked the horizon, the eastern sky still a bruised purple. He hadn't slept much, never did these days, not since Hannah. A creak in the barn floor or Josie's soft breathing from the makeshift cot in the corner would jolt him awake, his mind racing through the endless list of what-ifs. But today, there was work, real work, and that was something to hold on to. He slipped out of the small storage room Lena had cleared for them, careful not to wake Josie, and headed straight for the tractor parked like a rusted relic in the yard. The air was already thick with heat, the kind that promised another scorcher. Reed popped the hood, his calloused hands moving with practiced ease. He checked the oil filter, first clogged with dust and neglect, then the belts frayed but salvageable. By the time he was elbow-deep in the engine pulling wires and wiping grime, the first rays of light hit the fields, turning the withered alfalfa to a dull gold. This place was dying slow, but maybe he could buy it a little time. Lena appeared about 10 minutes later, 2 steaming mugs in hand. She looked like she hadn't slept, either dark circles under her eyes, but she moved with purpose, her steps firm on the cracked earth. "You start without being told?" she asked, handing him a mug. "People about to lose their land don't have time for detailed orders," Reed replied, taking a sip. The coffee was strong, almost bitter, but it cut through the fog in his head. He nodded thanks. "Did you get any sleep?" he asked after a beat. She let out a short laugh, leaning against the tractor's wheel. "You don't sleep well when you're 2 weeks from being homeless." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Reed caught the edge, the weariness that came from carrying too much for too long. He watched her out of the corner of his eye as he worked. Lena wasn't the type to sit idle. She headed to the garden patch, hauling buckets of water from the old cistern, tying up the scorched tomato vines with twine, patching leaks in the irrigation hoses with whatever scraps she had. She knew her way around the tools, her movements efficient, born from years of necessity. Not some fragile widow waiting for rescue. She was fighting tooth and nail, even if the odds were stacked. Josie stirred around 7, rubbing her eyes as she wandered out in her pajamas, bunny in tow. "Daddy, what's for breakfast?" Reed wiped his hands on a rag. "Whatever Miss Lena's got, kiddo. Go ask nicely." Josie beamed and trotted over to Lena, who was knee-deep in the goat pen milking the 2 remaining does. Reed heard them chatting, Josie's endless questions about the animals, Lena's patient answers. By the time he had the filter replaced and the belts tightened, Josie was naming the goats Cinnamon for the brown one, Ghost for the pale gray. She even started picking up scattered rusty nails from the yard, dropping them into an old bucket with a clang. "So Daddy doesn't step on them," she explained proudly when Reed checked on her. Around noon, they broke for sandwiches, peanut butter on stale bread with a few wilted apples from the orchard. They sat on the porch steps, the sun beating down like a hammer. Lena tore into hers quietly, but Reed could see the weight on her shoulders. "It's not just the land loan," she admitted, finally staring at her hands. "I owe Ferhay the vet feed store in town. If the bank's final appraisal goes south, if they see this place can't turn a profit, they'll hand it over to Harvey Cole without a second thought." Reed set his sandwich down. "What kind of appraisal?" "They come check the condition, livestock production potential, orders everything." She gave a bitter smile. "Right now, my biggest asset is bills." Josie looked up from her apple. "But you have baby goats, right?" Lena paused, then nodded toward the pen. "2 newborns last week." "Then you're not losing yet," Josie declared, as if it were that simple. Reed almost chuckled, but Lena's expression shifted, something like hope flickering through the exhaustion. He cleared his throat. "The kid's got a point. Fixing this place up is good, but it's not enough. You need to show cash flow. Now." Lena frowned. "From where?" "This weekend. Farm market right here." She stared at him like he'd suggested dancing for rain. "You're joking. What do I have to sell? Goat cheese eggs that jam in the pantry, whatever veggies are hanging on horse rides for kids' cookies if you can bake 'em." Reed sketched a quick plan on the back of an old receipt booth's signs, word of mouth. "Invite the town neighboring ranches. Generate revenue buzz. When the bank shows they won't see a desperate widow, they'll see a rancher turning things around." In 3 days, Lena's voice was skeptical, but her eyes lingered on the sketch. "In 3 days," she sat back, chewing her lip. "That's crazy." "Yeah. But it might work." "Yeah." That evening, after Josie crashed on the sofa mid-storybook, Lena brought Reed a blanket for his spot in the storage room. "I don't know how to thank you enough," she said quietly. "Then don't," Reed replied, folding it over his arm. She lingered in the doorway. "You too, huh?" "Too what?" "You've lost someone." The question hit like a gut punch, straight to the part he kept buried. Reed leaned against the frame, staring into the dim yard. "My wife, Hannah, 3 years ago. Hospital saved Josie, not her." Lena didn't offer pity. She just stood there silent, and somehow that silence eased something in him. For the first time in ages, talking about it didn't feel like shouting into a void. "My husband was Grant," she said softly. "Promised to fix that west barn last summer. Never got the lumber." The night wind rustled the dry grass outside, carrying the scent of parched earth. Reed looked at this woman, another widow piecing together a broken life, and felt a connection he hadn't sought but couldn't ignore. Maybe that's why he was still here. Not just the work, but the shared understanding that surviving wasn't the same as living. On the 6th day, Harvey Cole showed up like a storm cloud rolling in uninvited. Reed was knee-deep in the well pit wrestling with the old pump assembly, his shirt soaked through with sweat and grime. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the yard into a furnace, but he kept at it, tightening bolts, testing the seals. Lena was across the way, tallying the last of the hay bales in the barn, her notebook in hand. Josie played nearby, stacking rocks into what she called a fairy castle, chattering to herself about magic spells that could make rain fall. The air hummed with the kind of fragile progress they'd scraped together over the past few days. Then came the low rumble of an engine, smooth and expensive, cutting through the quiet. Reed straightened up, wiping his forehead, and spotted the black Buick pulling into the drive. It gleamed under the sun, out of place amid the dust and decay. The man who stepped out was built like a barrel, his belly straining against a beige vest, a fedora perched on his head like he was playing some old Western villain. 2 stocky men flanked him, their arms thick as fence posts, faces blank but eyes sharp. "Mrs. Dawson," the man drawled, his voice oily and confident as he sauntered toward the barn. "Just dropping by to see how things are progressing." Lena froze mid-note, her shoulders tensing. Reed could see the shift in her, the way her jaw set, her fingers gripping the pencil like a weapon. She stepped out into the yard facing him down. "You can wait for the appraisal day, Mr. Cole." Oh, but I'm eager." Harvey's eyes swept the property, the half-fixed tractor, the patched fences, Reed himself climbing out of the well pit. "And I see you've hired help." "He's none of your concern," Lena said, her tone ice cold. Harvey smiled, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Everything on this land will be my concern if you can't pay up." Reed wiped his hands on his jeans and walked over, not rushing but deliberate, positioning himself beside Lena. Not too close, but enough to make the two goons shift their weight. Josie peeked from behind her rock pile, sensing the tension, but Reed shot her a quick glance. "Stay put, kiddo." "I think it's time for you to leave," Reed said evenly. Harvey turned his gaze on him, sizing him up like a cut of meat. "And who might you be?" "Reed Walker, the one helping her hold this together." Harvey chuckled, a low, mocking sound. "With that dead tractor and a few crooked posts, better than waiting for folks to fall so you can scoop up their land." The air went still, charged like before a lightning strike. The goons rolled their shoulders, ready for a signal. Reed's muscles coiled. He wasn't looking for a fight, not with Josie watching, but he wouldn't back down either. Memories flashed, scrapping in bar lots back in his 20s before Hannah steadied him. He was older now, but the fire was still there. But Harvey didn't snap. Men like him were more dangerous when they stayed calm. "You've got 14 days, he said to Lena, eyes still on Reed. 8 left now. If that appraisal shows this dump can't turn a dime, I'll take over. Legally. Cleanly. By the book." "You call that clean," Lena shot back. "You bought Grant's debt right after he died and jacked up the interest like a thief." Harvey shrugged. "Business is business." He turned to go, but paused, adding lightly over his shoulder, "Though if you change your mind and want to sell direct, I could offer a fair price. Before the appraisal, of course. After that, you won't have leverage." The Buick pulled away, kicking up a thin cloud of dust. Lena stood frozen, her face pale under the tan. Reed watched her shoulders slump, the fight draining out like water from a cracked bucket. "Lena," he said softly. She turned her back, heading inside without a word. Reed gave her a minute, then followed. Finding her at the kitchen sink, hands braced on the edge, head bowed. "I hate how he looks at this place," she whispered, voice trembling with fury. "Like it's already his. Like he can just uproot my whole life and walk away with it." Reed leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Then don't let him win." She let out a hollow laugh. "Sounds so easy." "It's not." He pulled out a chair and sat, grabbing a scrap of paper from the table. With a pencil, he started sketching booths, signs, flow of people. "But we're fighting the wrong battle. You're fixing things for the bank to see it's not dead yet. Good. But we need proof it can make money. Right now." Lena turned, eyeing the sketch. "How?" "The market this weekend. Sell the cheese, eggs, jam, veggies. Charge for kid rides on the horses. Bake if you can." She sat across from him, scanning the plan. "In 3 days. In 3 days." She rubbed her temples. "That's insane." "Yeah. But it could work." Her eyes met his, a spark igniting amid the doubt. From that afternoon, the push began. Reed tackled the gate, welding fresh hinges and straightening posts so it didn't look like a drunk's handiwork. Lena dug out her old contact list, phoning former buyers from Grant's Days Ranchers stores, even the local diner. Josie teamed up with a neighbor kid biking into town to staple flyers on bulletin boards at the church and feed store. Farm fresh at Dawson Creek. They read with Josie's crayon drawings of goats and horses. That night, after Josie conked out mid-bedtime story, Reed sat on the porch steps, sharpening his tools under the stars. The air had cooled, carrying the faint scent of sage from the hills. Lena joined him, handing over a glass of iced tea. "You don't have to go this far," she said. Reed took a sip, the coolness cutting through the day's heat. "I know." "Then why are you—" He set the glass down, staring at the dark fields. "Josie's smiling more since we got here." He paused, weighing his words. "And I don't want to wake up tomorrow and drive off like nothing changed." Lena sat beside him, their shoulders close but not touching. The crickets chirped in the distance. I'm tired of doing it all alone, she admitted softly. And I don't want Josie thinking she has to say goodbye to someone she likes again. Reed chuckled quietly. Kid bonds fast. Yeah, Lena smiled faintly. She's terrifying that way. The silence stretched comfortable now, like they'd crossed some invisible line. Reed felt it a pull toward her, not just sympathy, but something warmer, riskier. He'd sworn off entanglements after Hannah focusing on Josie. But here in this dying ranch with this woman fighting tooth and nail, he wondered if maybe he was tired of running too. The pressure from Harvey didn't stop. 2 nights later, Reed woke to a crash. Someone had sabotaged the new fence section posts, yanked out like weeds. He and Lena spent the pre-dawn hours resetting them, flashlights bobbing in the dark. Cole's work, Lena muttered, hammering a stake. Reed nodded, anger simmering. Won't stop us. As the market loomed, Reed realized this wasn't just about saving land anymore. It was about saving themselves from the isolation that had defined them both. The fight had bound them, Reed, Lena, even Josie, in ways he hadn't expected. And as the weekend approached, he felt a quiet resolve. Whatever came, he wasn't walking away. The market was set to open at 9 sharp on the 12th day, and at 6:15, the sky unleashed hell. Reed jerked awake to the roar of rain pounding the barn roof like gunfire. He sat up on his cot, heart racing, the dim pre-dawn light filtering through cracks in the walls. Josie stirred beside him, mumbling something about thunder monsters, but he shushed her gently, tucking the blanket tighter. Outside, the world had turned to chaos, sheets of water slamming the ground, turning the yard into a muddy slurry. He pulled on his boots and jacket, stepping out into the torrent. The signs Josie had helped staple were already sagging, ink running like tears. The booths they'd rigged simple tables under tarps were flooding water, pooling in the dips. Lena was in the kitchen when he burst in her face, ashen as she stared out the window, trays of fresh-baked cookies cooling on the counter. The air smelled of cinnamon and despair. "It's over," she said flatly, not turning. No tears, no outburst, just that hollow resignation Reed knew too well from his own dark nights. He stood dripping in the doorway, water pooling at his feet. "Lena, you hear that?" She gestured at the downpour. "No one's driving out here in this." Josie padded in behind him, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, the fairy castle." Reed's chest tightened. All that work, the calls, the fixes, Josie's flyers scattered around town. He could see it slipping away just like everything else in his life. But then he looked at Lena, her hands clenched on the sink, fighting not to break, and Josie wide-eyed, waiting for him to fix it like he always did. No. He wouldn't let this storm win, not after they'd come this far. "We're not done," he said, voice steady as a hammer strike. She laughed bitterly. "You gonna command the rain to stop?" He was already pulling out his phone, scrolling through contacts. 1 hour. We'll have tents up." He dialed the Harlan brothers, first old rodeo buddies who'd owed him a favor since he fixed their trailer last winter. "Yeah, 3 big event canopies if you got 'em. Rain's bad, but we're pushing through." Next, Luke Benson from the neighboring ranch. "Tables, chairs, whatever you can spare, and spread the word." Then Rosie at the diner. "Post about the market on the community page. Tell him we've got hot coffee and fresh bakes waiting." Lena watched him, mouth slightly open. "You did all that in, 2.5 minutes?" Reed pocketed the phone. "People help when you ask, especially if they hate Cole as much as we do." An hour later, the first trucks sloshed into the yard, tires churning mud. The Harlan boys jumped out, hauling stakes, canvas, and ropes, shouting over the rain as they hammered poles into the sodden ground. Luke arrived with a load of wooden benches and crates of apples. "Sell 'em for me, settle up later." Rosie pulled up with thermoses of coffee and stacks of waffles, grinning despite the wet. "Rain means folks crave comfort food. Let's make this work." Lena stood under the porch awning, stunned as the yard transformed. Reed worked alongside the others, tying down flaps, rigging lights from a generator he'd patched yesterday. Josie darted between them, handing out tools with glee, her raincoat flapping like a cape. By 9:20, the market opened not in defeat, but defiance. 3 trucks, at first hesitant in the deluge, then 5 more. Word had spread fresh goat cheese eggs straight from the coop jars of peach jam, glowing like captured sunshine bundles of herbs that had somehow survived the drought. Kids splashed in puddles while parents huddled under the tents, sipping hot drinks, chatting about the weather, like it was just another Wyoming quirk. Josie turned the horse area into a hit, charging $1 per ride under the barn overhang. "Hold tight," she'd yell, leading Cinnamon in careful circles, her laughter cutting through the rain. Lena manned the cheese booth, her hands steady now, signing new orders, a weekly delivery to the diner, bulk eggs for the church bake sale. Reed moved between stalls, fixing leaks in the tarps, hauling crates, feeling a surge he hadn't known in years. This wasn't just survival, it was revival. People came not out of pity, but because they remembered Grant hated coal, or simply needed the community on a miserable day. By midday, the yard buzzed with dozens of folks, the rain a steady drum but no longer a killer. Reed paused for a breath, wiping water from his face, when he spotted the black Buick creeping up the drive. Harvey Cole stepped out, umbrella in hand, his face twisting as he took in the scene, crowded tents, cash changing hands, laughter echoing. This wasn't the failing ranch he'd banked on. "Nice little show," Harvey said, approaching Lena's booth, his voice dripping sarcasm. "But one wet crowd doesn't erase your ledger." Lena straightened, fire in her eyes. "It shows potential. That's what the bank cares about." Reed was at her side in seconds, mud caking his boots. "Time to go, Cole." Harvey ignored him, smiling thinly. "You think I'd let this slide?" Reed's gut twisted. He glanced around just in time to see one of Harvey's goons slinking toward the generator, powering the lights, hand reaching for the cords. "Josie!" Reed barked, spotting her too close to the main tent. "Get back!" Everything exploded at once. The goon yanked the plug sparks flying as water met exposed wires. Reed lunged, tackling the man into the mud with a grunt. Fists flew, Reed's connecting with the guy's jaw, the thug's elbow slamming into his ribs. Pain bloomed hot, but Reed pinned him down, shouting over the chaos. Screams erupted from the crowd, tents flickered as power surged. Harvey cursed his other lackey, charging in, but Luke and a couple of ranchers blocked him, fists ready. "Enough!" The sheriff's voice boomed from the gate Rosie had called him earlier. "Just in case." He waited in badge flashing, cuffing the goon under Reed while deputies grabbed the other. Harvey protested, face red, but the damage was done, sabotage in broad daylight witnessed by half the town. Reed pushed to his feet, ribs aching, blood mixing with rain on his lip. Josie ran to him, burying her face in his side. "Daddy, you're hurt." "I'm okay, kiddo." He hugged her tight, then looked to Lena. She was pale, but steady, helping calm the crowd. The bank appraiser arrived at 3 as scheduled, stepping out of his sedan into the aftermath. But instead of a failing operation, he saw resilience booths, still bustling, customers lingering despite the drama, Lena's ledger showing real sales. He took notes, nodding as folks vouched for her stories of Grant's legacy, the community's support. "Impressive turnaround," he said before leaving. "We'll review this favorably." As the rain eased to a drizzle, the market wrapped up. Lena tallied the take on the porch, her hands shaking. "After costs, it's enough for the first overdue payment." She looked up, eyes shining. "And the bank? They're pausing the foreclosure for restructuring." Reed sank onto the step beside her, wincing at his bruises, but grinning through it. "We did it." She turned to him, and before he could react, she pulled him into a hug. Fierce, grateful something more simmering beneath. Reed held her, the scent of rain and baked goods mixing with the warmth of her. In that moment, amid the ache and exhaustion, he realized this wasn't just about the ranch anymore. It was about her, about them. The storm had tried to wash it all away, but they'd held on, and in the holding something unbreakable had formed. The bank's letter arrived 3 days later, sealed in a crisp white envelope that Lena tore open with shaking hands at the kitchen table. Reed watched from the doorway, Josie perched on a stool beside her, munching on an apple. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air fresh, and the ground soft like the world had been washed clean. Lena's eyes scanned the page, widening as she read. "They're extending the loan," she whispered, "reducing the interest, giving me 6 months to restructure." She looked up, disbelief turning to a slow, radiant smile. "And Cole, The investigation's moving forward. Sabotage charges plus shady lending practices. He won't touch this place now. Reed let out a breath. He hadn't realized he was holding a weight lifting from his chest. "It's done," Josie whooped, jumping down to hug Lena's waist. "We won. The ranch is safe." Lena laughed, pulling the girl close, but her eyes met Reed's over Josie's head, grateful, relieved, and something deeper that made his pulse quicken. He'd come here for water, stayed for the fight. Now, with the dust settling, he wondered what came next. He didn't leave right away. There was still work reinforcing the west barn with fresh lumber Luke had donated, deepening the well to tap a steadier vein, building a new chicken coop from scrap. Reed threw himself into it, his hands finding purpose in the rhythm of hammer and nail. Josie settled in, too, starting school in the nearby town, coming home with stories of new friends and playground adventures. "Miss Lena helped me braid my hair today," she'd say, beaming as if it were the most natural thing. Reed saw how Josie looked at Lena not just as a kind stranger, but someone who filled the quiet spaces Hannah had left. A month slipped by in the crisp fall air, the fields turning golden under cooler skies. The ranch breathed easier. Lena signed 3 steady contracts for goat cheese and eggs deliveries rolling out weekly. Orders trickled in from the market, buzz enough to keep the bills at bay. Reed fixed the tractor, fully plowing a small plot for winter rye, the earth yielding under the blades like a promise kept. One evening in late October, as the sun dipped low, painting the hills in amber, Reed stood at the fence watching Josie chase the 2 new goat kids across the yard. Their bleats mixed with her giggles, the sound pure and light. Lena stepped out from the house, 2 mugs of coffee in hand, steam curling in the chill. She handed him one, their fingers brushing a touch that lingered longer each time. "You know," she said, leaning on the rail beside him, "I thought those 14 days were my end. Time to lose it all." Reed sipped the coffee, strong and warm like always. "And now?" She turned to him, her eyes soft in the fading light. "Now I think they were the start of something else." He set the mug down, facing her fully. The wind rustled the leaves, carrying the scent of damp earth and hay. Reed had run for so long, town to town, job to job, telling himself it was for Josie, that attachments only led to loss. But here, watching the ranch heal, feeling the pull toward this woman who'd fought beside him, he was done running. "If I said I wanted to stay," he began quietly, "would that be okay?" Lena's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. "I'd say, don't say it if it's pity. It's not." He reached for her hand-calloused palm against hers. "I'm tired, Lena. Tired of hauling Josie from place to place, calling it life. Tired of pretending we don't need more than just getting by." He paused, thumb tracing her knuckles. "And I don't want to drive off tomorrow like none of this mattered." She squeezed his hand, stepping closer. "I'm tired of doing it alone, too." Her voice was soft, vulnerable. "And I don't want Josie to lose someone she cares about. Or me either." Reed smiled, the ache in his ribs from the fight long faded, replaced by something warmer. He pulled her in, her head resting against his shoulder, arms wrapping around each other like they'd been waiting for this. No rush, no fire, just 2 people who'd lost too much, finding solace in the quiet strength of the other. From then on, Reed stayed. He helped turn the ranch around, fully sealing the barn roof against winter snows, expanding the garden with Josie planting seeds in neat rows. School became routine for her, with Lena packing lunches and braiding hair in the mornings. "You're good at this," Reed told Lena one day, watching her tie Josie's ribbons. She shrugged, but her cheeks flushed. "Grant and I always wanted kids. Never got the chance." "You've got one now," Reed said, meaning it. Josie called her Miss Lena still, but the hugs and bedtime stories said more. As the days cooled, their bond deepened, shared coffees on the porch, quiet talks about Hannah and Grant, hands brushing in the barn. One night after Josie was asleep, Reed took Lena's hand under the stars. "I didn't come here looking for this," he admitted. "Neither did I." She leaned in, their lips, meeting soft and sure, a kiss born from shared battles, not fleeting heat. A month later, The ranch hummed with life-new contracts, a small flock of chickens clucking in the coop, Josie with school friends over for play dates. Reed looked out from the fence one afternoon, Josie racing the goats, Lena calling her in for snacks. This was home, not just a stop, but roots digging deep. Those 14 days hadn't been an end. They'd been the spark that saved not just the land, but him too. Reed had helped Lena from disaster, but in her strength, her quiet fire, she'd given him a reason to stop running. Together with Josie between them, they'd built something unbreakable, a family from the ashes, proof that sometimes helping a stranger saves you right back.